Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this press briefing. The subject of the briefing today will be the escalating violence and human rights violations in Gaza and across the occupied Palestinian Territory. I'll begin with a quick introduction of our speakers today. We will have opening remarks from 4 speakers, 2 of them in the room with us, and 2 special rapporteurs who will be speaking online. Here with us, we have Mr. Pedro Arrojo-Agudo, the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Water and Sanitation, and Mr. George Katrougalos, who is the Independent Expert on the Promotion of a Democratic and Equitable International Order. Online, we have Ms. Francesca Albanese, who is the Special Rapporteur on the Situation of Human Rights in the Palestinian Territories, occupied since 1967, and Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, who is the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health. Each of the speakers will have brief opening remarks. We will begin with Ms. Albanese, Special Rapporteur. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, especially to OHCHR for convening this briefing, which is very urgent, and the other special rapporteurs and mandate holders who are joining me today. Good day, everyone. I wish to address the alarming escalation of violence in the occupied Palestinian Territory, the one that has ravaged Gaza over the past 11 months, and the troubling indications that the violence is spreading to the West Bank. Outlining the current situation in 5 minutes in a way that renders justice and does not dehumanize even further the Palestinians is impossible, and still I will do my best in highlighting 3 main points. First, the current situation on the ground. In Gaza for almost a year, Israel's genocidal assault has devastated entire families, razed the neighborhoods, destroyed essential infrastructure. The scale of this destruction has led to allegations of homicide, urbicide, scholasticide, medicide, cultural genocide, and more recently, ecocide. This violence has gone unpunished and continues unabated. Nearly 2 million people, over 90% of the Gaza population, are forcibly displaced, many relocated multiple times. Almost everyone is reliant on humanitarian aid, which is limited and insufficient. The death toll stands at over 40,000 Palestinians killed and over 95,000 injured. These are stark numbers, but still, the trauma inflicted, both physical and psychological, will linger for generations. The fury unleashed against Gaza has not spared the Israeli hostages that were taken on October 7 by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups. Using them as political pawns, Israel has endangered their lives, sometimes even killed them, and exacerbating the pain of their families and friends who are longing for their return in Israel. Today, Gaza remains under siege and relentless bombardment. Evacuation orders continue to be issued to a population that has nowhere to go, and they are just waiting for their death. The closure of the Rafah border has further exacerbated their ability to escape or to survive. The suffering is unimaginable, and the world continue to remain silent. Primarily, I'm referring to Western countries. In the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the unbearable blind violence that has been unleashed in Gaza is finally not sparing those living in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And the attacks against the Palestinians have been intensifying after October 7. Land confiscation, destruction of infrastructure, and depopulation wrought by the Israeli occupation and settler militias since October 2023 has been matched by violent calls for displacement of Palestinians into Jordan or into the Arab countries, acts of forced displacement, extrajudicial killings, and appalling acts of revenge, physical and psychological torture. So far, 679 Palestinians, including 159 children, have been killed in this area. The Israeli military, supported by armed settlers, has intensified its strikes on the Palestinian towns and villages, especially in the north, where aerial and ground attacks have hit Jenin, Nablus, Tulkarem, Tubas, with violence escalating to levels not seen in 2 decades, particularly in the last 2 weeks. Airstrikes and artillery have killed dozens of Palestinians while injuring many more. Bulldozers and explosives are destroying, as we speak, vital infrastructure, including roads and utilities, disrupting essential services like water and electricity. Israeli forces continue to besiege hospitals, halting ambulances, and detaining many medical staff. Israeli leaders have openly called West Bank towns and refugee camps mini Gazas. And despite these apparent crimes and continued incitement from top officials, those responsible for these crimes remain unpunished. The second element I want to bring to your attention is, despite the horror on the ground, hope comes from the people who are protesting against the complicity that is allowing Israel to commit this crime. And hope comes from the international justice system, which is producing a seismic shift in recent months. First, the International Criminal Court has been requested to issue arrest warrants concerning various atrocities, underscoring the need for accountability. Second, two significant cases are pending before the International Court of Justice regarding allegations of genocide. South Africa versus Israel, with a set of preliminary measures that have gone not followed up, and the second is Nicaragua versus Germany. Third, the International Criminal Court, third, almost 60 days ago, the ICJ has issued an historical decision, an advisory opinion that declares all Israel's presence in the occupied Palestinian territory unlawful, amounting to annexation, violation of Palestinian self-determination, and therefore to be dismantled. The advisory opinion provides clear guidance on the responsibility of states and international organizations to address these violations. Third and last point, shockingly, in the face of the abyss reached in the OPT and the hope provided by the international justice system, most member states remained inactive at best, or actively aiding and assisting Israel's criminal conduct. The international community must act decisively and must act now. And as I'm speaking to media today, let me say something. Too often, media has disseminated Israeli disinformation, which has served to justify the crimes being committed. This coverage has contributed to dehumanize Palestinians and to its public perception, undermining accountability. As well, a Western citizen myself, I ask Western journalists among you, if you really resent and repent our past, if you really resent and repent what Western countries have done to millions during colonialism, including during Nazi fascism in Europe, stop dehumanizing the Palestinians. Please do your job. Present the facts, ask to enter all areas in the OPT, and do not perpetuate narratives that allowed for continued injustice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Albanese. And we will now hear from the independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. Mr. Katrougalos, you have the floor.
It is clear now to everybody that there is an evolving tragedy in Palestine. However, this tragedy is not an issue just for the Palestinians. It is immediately related to the future of multilateralism and the United Nations system of rules. There is nowadays an obvious crisis of both of them. Double standards, silence before major international crimes like those committed in Gaza, official threats against international judges. Recently, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has said that he had heard from a senior figure that the court was not built for the West and its allies, but just for Africa and thugs like Putin. So I think that it is important for the future of a fair, just, democratic, equitable international order, not to adopt double standards regarding international crimes, but have a uniform position based on principles, values, the United Nations Charter. It is important the immediate recognition of the state of Palestine. It is of utter importance all states to exert pressure for an immediate stop, a ceasefire of the war in Gaza. The warrants recently demanded by the prosecutor of the ICC are a promise of accountability and end of impunity for the occupied Palestinian territory. This promise should be kept. Any further delay would undermine the deterrent effect that accountability could create. It is really regrettable that European states have acted against these warrants. The International Court of Justice, which will determine the state responsibility of Israel, has already declared the occupation illegal. Its work is complementary to the work of the ICC for full justice in Palestine. Both courts must do their work without foreign interference and threats to demonstrate the promise of global justice and individual accountability for all victims of this war. Many thanks.
Thank you. And we continue with the Special Rapporteur on Water. Mr. Agudo, you have the floor.
No, it's okay. Thank you very much. Well, Israel, through government and army spokesmen, publicly proclaimed from the beginning of this war that it would cut off water, food, and energy to the civilian population, explicitly. Currently, the population lives on an average of 4.7 liters of water per person and per day. Any one of us uses no less than 100 liters per day for our daily needs. And the WHO sets the minimum requirement in emergency situations at 15 liters. In addition, accessible water is often contaminated by fecal matter, leading to serious health problems, especially for children, often resulting in death. The only one natural source of fresh water is the coastal aquifer. The Strip is home to 2.3 million Palestinians, of whom, it is important, 1.7 million are refugees, forced by Israel to live there in refugee camps. This huge population has been forced to pump 3 times more water than the aquifer receives through natural replenishment, resulting during the blockade for 1.5 decades in intense marine intrusion and salinization. In addition, Israel has been blocking 70% of the materials needed to build and operate sewage treatment plants as dual-use materials, preventing proper sewage treatment, which has led to progressive fecal contamination of groundwater. Until the outbreak of the war, drinking water was supplied by desalination plants and a limited amount of water sold to the Palestinians by Israel. This provided drinking water to around 40% of the population. At the outbreak of the war, Israel radically cut off this water supply and cut off the power supply, collapsing desalination plants. The lack of clean water has led to 1.7 million cases of infection diseases, mainly diarrhea, dysentery, and hepatitis A, particularly affecting children, as well as cases of polio, smallpox, and other infectious diseases that can trigger massive and deadly epidemics. All this, coupled with the lack of medical care, result in deaths, especially of babies and children, making water scarcity and contamination a silent bomb which has far less visibility than those that destroy buildings, but are no less lethal bomb. Israel's violation of existing international law, as the International Criminal Court has already ruled, is systematic. Both the Fourth Geneva Convention and the Rome Statute, as well as customary international and humanitarian law, are being violated on a daily basis. But not compliance with international law related to water does not only concern Gaza. The militarization of water in the occupied Palestinian territory has been at the heart of a policy of water and territorial apartheid for the past 50 years, including the destruction of basic Palestinian water infrastructure. Palestinians have no access to the Jordan River and cannot build wells or water infrastructure in their own territories. They have only 70 liters per person a day, and as a mean, and many rural communities have only 20 liters, while Israeli population has 4 times more on average, and illegal settlers receive and use 18 times more water for their crops and swimming pools. Finally, we are witnessing a genocide against the Palestinian people. We cannot remain impassive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Special Rapporteur. And now we move to the Special Rapporteur on the right to health. Dr. Mofokeng, you have your floor.
I welcome this opportunity to speak to you today in my capacity as the Special Rapporteur on the right to health. We have watched this horror of a genocide in Gaza unfold over the past 11 months. It is important to note that even before October the 7th, the situation was already incompatible with the realization of the right to health. And this current episode represents another amongst many episodes of a display of a recalcitrant, repugnant attitude of an occupying regime, as well as its powerful global allies. And this current episode of ongoing enactments of a decades-long genocidal plans is systemic, and it's sustained imperialist violence that experienced by Palestinians every single day since the occupation. According to the Gaza Ministry of Health, as of 14 September, approximately 41,000 Palestinians have been killed, 95,000 injured. And in the past 24 hours alone, 24 Palestinians were killed and 57 more injured that we can account for. With more than 50 days having passed since the International Court of Justice issued a landmark advisory opinion declaring Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories encompassing the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, as illegal under international law, emphasizing that Israel's actions amount to annexation. Yet member states, with all the implications of the ICJ opinion and their obligations to comply, have chosen not to do so. And days into this current war and a genocide, I did warn that the Gaza's medical infrastructure was on the path of being irreparably damaged, and that healthcare providers were working in a dire situation, and that the right to health itself was being targeted. And the long-term trauma that the people in Gaza will carry with them because of this enduring intergenerational physical and mental health and the impact of racism and structural discrimination cannot truly be quantified. We are yet as a world, even as clinicians and doctors such as myself, yet to develop a matrix to truly measure the true impact of what this genocide has meant, the compounding effect of what this situation is, remembering very well that even before October the 7th, life was not conducive to dignity in the Gaza Strip. And so the attacks on hospitals, on healthcare workers are on a scale we have never seen before. And the right to health has been decimated at every single level. Today, only 17 out of the 36 hospitals are partially functional and maintain some minimal service. And only 58 out of 132 primary healthcare facilities are functional as they struggle to save lives amid critical shortages of healthcare workers, trickling supplies of fuel, medical items. And we know with the polio vaccination program right now, a lot of children have received their first dose of vaccine. However, they and their families continue to face bombardment when they try to reach those facilities. They are still at risk of bombardment when they depart those facilities. So the continued concern for the right to health is still continuing, as we see with the kinds of illnesses such as skin disease, air and waterborne illnesses, acute mental health distress that continues, that we cannot have a siloed approach that looks at only one solution and does not take into account the fact that for Gaza to recover, for a health system to do what it needs to do, there has to be an immediate ceasefire. And that is not something that should be negotiated. An immediate ceasefire is absolutely necessary. My mandate continues to receive information regarding arrests and detention of healthcare workers specifically. And this demonstrates a pattern that even when medical personnel are on duty, they are also being forced to evacuate hospitals. They are being harassed to leave their patients behind. Some are arrested, some are dying and killed under those circumstances of torture, repeatedly being beaten in prison with their bodies showing signs of torture. And I have communicated in an urgent appeal to Israel some of these concerns. So the destruction of the health system right now is created by this genocide. It's completely incompatible, but it's been enabled by Israel and its allies to be able to continue. There must be an end to the occupation. There must be an immediate ceasefire. We must allow critical medical supplies and secure the safety of healthcare workers to reach every single facility. Expedite medical evacuations for everyone who needs them. And my last point is that the intimidation and harassment of United Nations staff and experts who are carrying out their mandates must be stopped. And this issue must be taken seriously, as we are all operating within mandated work, and there is no place for harassment, intimidation, or even reprisals for people who are working with the United Nations, including targeted intimidation and harassment of experts. A genocide is incompatible with realization of the right to health, and peace follows liberation. And as you can see, there is no way that you can extinguish the human desire for freedom. And this is ultimately about the freedom of the people to self-determine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Special Rapporteur, and thank you to all the experts for sharing their statements today. We'll open for questions now, take some questions in the room first, and then move to those of you joining us online. If I could please ask you to state your name and organization when you ask.
Yes, thank you. My name is Isabel Saco. I work for EFED Spanish News Agency. I have two questions. One of is for Mr. Arroyo. I would like to know if he considers that water is being used as a weapon of war in Gaza, concretely, and if you remember any other case or situation where water has been used in this way in a war. And for all the participants, if you could briefly say if you agree or not from the perspective of your own mandate, if there is genocide in Gaza or not. Thank you.
Yes, unfortunately, there are other cases. Water is more and more used as a weapon against civilian population, not against the other army. I have cases also at present in the border between Syria and Turkey, in the region of in the Aluk population, and other cases. We are seeing also in some way also this kind of strategy in Ukraine also, but nothing comparable, similar to the case of not just Gaza, but Palestinian in general, occupied Palestinian, because it's something that is organized from 50 years ago, and now during the war in Gaza, it was explicit. It was not just to say, no, explicitly recognized, we will cut water food and medicaments. So this is, I used to say, just in order to know, when international law qualifies the systematic blockade of food, normally we talk more on food, it's okay, as a crime against humanity in the category of extermination. This is the Rome Statute. Water, I remember to you that water is the main food we need, human beings, and it is irreplaceable. But at the same time, if drinkability is not guaranteed, it becomes the most terrible vector of disease and death that exists in the world. So in this case, this is clearly employed as a weapon in Gaza against Palestinian civil population.
The second part of Isabel's question was directed at all of the experts. Would anybody like to respond?
Maybe I repeat the question is if you consider from the own perspective of your mandate, if there is genocide, well, some of you already said, but not all of you, in Gaza, genocide in Gaza, and why? If you can just make a statement of this. Thank you.
John?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think that genocidal intent has been proven from the beginning, already at the hearing of South Africa's application. We had a lot of statements by Israeli officials stating, many of them, that Palestinians are animals that cannot be treated according to the international rules of conducting the war. And since then, the situation has gotten much, much more worse, as already Mrs. Albanese statements have been analyzing. So I think that there is not any more a question about that.
Would any of the other experts, Ms. Albanese, would you like to?
May I?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I was, as I was listening to my distinguished colleagues, I said how nice it is to speak a common language, because, I mean, there are many special rapporteurs who have signed statements denouncing since mid-October the risk of genocide, serious risk of genocide, and as November, an unfolding genocide ongoing. Our colleague, the special rapporteur on the right to food, has published an astonishing report on how food sovereignty has been attacked, leading to starvation being a tool of war. But let me go back to the question that was asked concerning water. I agree, of course, with my colleague, the special rapporteur on the right to water, concerning water being used as a tool of war. But here the context is not that of a conflict. And please, media and journalists, we need to get the framing right. The ICJ advisory opinion has called out the Israel colonization enterprise, settler colonization enterprise in the occupied Palestinian territory, other than by name. Therefore, you have to keep in mind that water, including in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, was already being used not just as a tool of war, as a tool to encourage, to push people into forced displacement, because the per capita water distribution was 80% of the total water basins that have been encircled by the wall and by settlements for the settlers who shouldn't be, the Israeli settlers who shouldn't be there in the first place, and 20% for the Palestinians. So we are talking of 300 liters per capita per Israeli settlers, and 70 liters per person on average to the Palestinians. So this is the context, and we shouldn't miss the forest for the trees. Israel has put forward a settler colonial enterprise in what remains of historical Palestine, and it is to be stopped now.
Yeah, we'll take that.
Thank you very much, Musa Asi, Al Mayadeen TV. First of all, can please send us your notice. It's very important for our work. J'ai une question pour Madame Albanese. Vous intervenez pour je ne sais pas combien de fois depuis le 7 octobre, et à chaque fois, vous dénoncez le crime de guerre qui se passe à Gaza, et vous avez toujours des messages envers la communauté internationale. Aujourd'hui, après bientôt une année après le début de cette guerre, est-ce que vous avez senti un changement dans l'attitude des pays, surtout les pays soutenant Israël? Merci.
Should I answer?
Yes, please.
Oui et non. Je pense qu'on peut s'apercevoir d'une certaine nervosisme qui rend disons l'échelle politique anxieuse autour de ce qui se passe de nouveau au niveau de la justice internationale, la Cour pénale internationale et la Cour de justice internationale. Mais ce que je vois, et c'est vraiment navrant, c'est qu'au lieu de résoudre le problème à la racine, c'est-à-dire au lieu d'exercer de la pression sur Israël, l'effort maintenant, c'est de monter encore plus d'excuses et de justifications pour la conduite criminelle d'Israël. Il n'y a aucune raison pour ignorer la décision de la Cour de justice internationale qui a déclaré que l'occupation, soit comme présence militaire, soit comme présence civile, doit être démantelée le plus vite possible, et personne ne réagit. Ça doit être jugé ça sera jugé, j'espère, par des tribunaux internationaux et par des tribunaux au niveau local aussi. Ça, c'est la justice dont on a besoin.
Thank you. Yeah.
Non, simplement ajouter, je suis d'accord avec Albanese, c'est vrai. Moi, je dirais que effectivement, la réaction existe, elle est positive, mais elle est insuffisante. Il y a plein de pays qui ne disaient rien, qui maintenant, explicitement, sont avec cette position de cesser le feu, etc., tout ce qu'elle a dit. Mais ce n'est pas suffisant du moment où les grands pouvoirs mondiaux continuent à justifier ou à faire le silence devant cette situation. Et donc, je pense qu'on est sur le point d'exiger à nos gouvernements la défense de l'ordre international. Ce n'est même pas des Palestiniens ou pas. Comme il a dit, on a les Nations Unies en danger. L'organisation qu'on a réussi à faire, les lois qu'on a réussi à accorder, tout ça est en danger devant cette question.
Jamie, and then Nina, and then we'll move to some questions online. Oh, sorry, did you want? Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Ravi Kant. I represent the Wired publication in India. The two questions, you constantly refer to the double standards and hypocrisy of the Western nations. Would that include the United States? Because you constantly refer to the European Western states. And also, I want to know that, India's sort of, in terms of weapons that are being used, which are destroying much of the assets of Palestinian. Are there Indian bombs which are being used? Is there any sort of awareness or knowledge on this issue? This is a question open to all. So, thank you.
Ms. Albanese, will you take that question?
Yes, happy to. I in fact, I was thinking after answering the previous question, sometimes we are unfair because international community is made of so many states, and we need to be very critical. But in fact, I would like to make sure that when we are critical, we do not overshadow the incredible shift that has been provoked by states like South Africa. And now, I mean, from South Africa to Chile, there has been a reaction from the global South. And I want to acknowledge the states and thank the states to save what remains to be saved of the international law-based system. When we talk of hypocrisy and double standards, I don't think that this is a prerogative of the Western countries only, though. There are countries in the Arab region and other countries in the global South who have proven to be strong allies of Israel at the expense of life and dignity of the Palestinians, but let me say, of the future of the Israelis as well, because a society which is traversed by a genocidal call, by a genocidal force, has very little to be happy and to live safe. Very little to be happy about or to feel safe with. And concerning Indian weapons, no, I'm personally not aware about it, but this is, the involvement of the military and security sectors in the crimes that are committed in the context of Israel's settler colonial occupation of what remains of Palestine is something I intend to investigate as soon as possible. In fact, it was my plan to do that last year, and then the genocide happened, and this was postponed. But thank you for your input.
Go ahead, Judge.
I fully agree with what Ms. Albanese has said. Just because there was a direct question regarding United States, I must say that, of course, United States have not showed any kind of leadership in order to stop what's happening, the great tragedy in Gaza. Instead, they have invited, as you know, for the fourth time, Israeli Prime Minister Mr. Netanyahu in a very celebrating speech in the capital. And the little that it has been done regarding sending arms to Israel has not changed the situation. But practically it was, in my eyes at least, a PR relationship. So I really expecting this issue to be one of the issues of the debate towards the presidential elections, exactly because I said in my introductory remarks, I do not consider that an isolated issue, an isolated fact. As also my colleague Pedro Arrojo has said, it is a kind of test regarding the survival of the international system of based order. And finally, just as a little remark, there is a lot of hypocrisy at the level of states, not just at the states that we have already named, but one should not also ignore the rising wave of solidarity that it is present now throughout the world, both in our European countries, both in the United States, and of course in the global South. I think that this solidarity of the peoples is one of the main ways to have a different future than the dystopian that now is evolving before our eyes.
Thank you. Jamie from the Associated Press.
Can you hear me? Okay. My question is for Ms. Albanese, I suppose, although also Mr. Arroyo-Agudo also made an allusion. You mentioned that the United Nations is in jeopardy I think if I understood your French comments correctly. And I just want to make sure, we've seen a number of recent strikes in Gaza against schools that have become shelters. And Israel, of course, says that those strikes are aimed at militants. So my question is the United Nations able to keep militants out of such shelters or somehow ensure that these shelters are devoid of any militants? And if not the United Nations, then who? Who should be doing that? Thanks.
Ms. Albanese, please go.
Yes. I would like to answer in two parts. So first, is the UN in jeopardy? Yes, it is. And as the historian Ras Sigal, who I keep on quoting, says, the fact that Israel was born as a state of exception to international law and to the rules set by the post-World War II order has not helped. In fact, I do believe that Israel has been a constant violator of international law, including USCOGEN's norms that admit no derogation, like the prohibition of apartheid and racial segregation, and the prohibition of, and the duty to respect the right of self-determination of the Palestinians. But of course, the list is long because Israel has committed war crimes and potentially crimes against humanity, against the Palestinian people far before and for decades before the 7th of October. So yes, I mean, this is a vulnerance in the UN system. I'm not saying that there are no other violators of international law and UN resolution, but surely Israel has a systemic pattern, and the impunity that has been granted has enabled its hubris in standing against every and any UN norm, international law provision, including the ICJ, 2 ICJ advisory opinions and 3 sets of ICJ provisional measures to prevent genocide. Now, going to the militants, it seemed to me that again, we are facing a framing problem. Now, I know I'm aware that what I'm going to say, it's going to sound quite problematic to those who seem to believe that Israel is allowed to do anything it pleases in the occupied Palestinian territory. But because Israel's presence is unlawful in the occupied Palestinian territory, it constitutes an aggression against the right of self-determination. And the Palestinians, like it or not, have the right to resist the oppression, of course, within the realm and within the limits of the law. Therefore, civilians cannot be targeted, killed, or taken hostages, no question. But your question makes me think that there is a justification for Israel's assault against the Palestinians in Gaza, including what might legitimately constitute resistance. And this is problematic. Because I don't think that Israel will ever succeed eradicating Hamas, because again, and this is beyond what under international humanitarian law constitute a legitimate military purpose. I've said it over and over together with other international law experts. But again, you cannot eradicate the legitimate expectations of people to have freedom and dignity, because this is what is at stake here. And rest assured that the Palestinians will continue to resist, like any people who has been under colonial rule, and the history is replenished of experiences of people breaking the yoke of colonization after enduring years of subjugation and repression. Palestinians are not an exception.
Thank you. Nina, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Nina Larson, AFP. I wanted to follow up on the question about the UN being in danger. Israel, as you've said, has had a fairly contentious relationship with the UN since for years and years, but it's obviously reached a low point now. I mean, how do you see that impacting the UN's work in general, impacting your own work, and also sort of the fact of ignoring rulings, is that having an impact on other countries, do you think, and their relationship to the UN? Thank you.
Which of the experts would like to take that question? Would it be?
I don't know. When I'm very, very close to us, escalators doesn't work. Tomorrow I have a side event here and I have no translation. We have no the second travel we are obliged by the rapporteurs is not possible because the UN has no money for this. It's obligation. This is the punishment that we have at present in the United Nations. It should be a scandal, an international scandal, because the main powers are delaying the payment. They are obliged, they are compromised, committed. It's a direct impact on the daily functioning of the United Nations, but the problem is much bigger, of course, because is the fact that at present many people say, well, United Nations is not useful. And what happens after this? When the criminal court make a decision, when the council, the Security Council, make decisions, and nothing is respected, and the main powers doesn't do nothing, doesn't do anything. We are blowing up the United Nations if we don't react. At the same time, I used to say, and this is my position, just my position, is a great opportunity for reacting, for changing the needs, the things that we need to change in this United Nations, that continue to be an institution that we need more than ever. So perhaps this situation, this critical situation, is the opportunity for rethinking what to do in front of this.
It is not just us. The Secretary General has recently said that the situation in Gaza, and he associated that also with Ukraine, the deadlock of the Security Council, I'm quoting now, may have perhaps fatally undermined the latter's authority, the Security Council. It is not an issue just for the Security Council. We see a deepening divide between North and South. Of course, there are conflicting interests, but in order to be able to work in a functional, if not harmonious, international order, a first obligation is for everybody to respect the United Nations rules. This is not happening in the case of Israel, and you are very right to say that it is not just what's happening on the ground. We have some very direct attacks, insults of high Israeli officials against the United Nations. I hope that it is not going to be continued. I trust that the progressive and democratic citizens of Israel would not let their country become a pariah like South Africa has become during the times of apartheid.
May I?
Yes, Vitaly, go ahead, please.
I share what my colleagues have said, although I think that it's unavoidable for Israel to become a pariah in the face of its continuous, relentless, vilifying assault on the United Nations on top of millions of Palestinians. But this year, the UN Secretary General, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council have been constantly vilified. Not that it has not happened before, but never with this intensity. And also, let me shed light on what has happened to UNRWA, which is not only a lifeline for Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory today, but also Israel. UNRWA represents, as a subsidiary organ of the General Assembly, an untouchable mechanism that testifies the permanent responsibility of the United Nations toward the Palestinian people till their question of self-determination and the right of return of millions of Palestinian refugees is not addressed and resolved. And this year, UNRWA has been attacked physically and functionally, it has had around 200 staff members killed. 70% of UNRWA infrastructure has been either destroyed or severely damaged. UNRWA premises have been attacked while sheltering thousands of civilians. And on top of it, UNRWA has been smeared and vilified. And I wish, and of course wishing in bracket, but in inverted commas, I wish the attacks were only by Israel. But it seems to me, and I fear sometimes to be victim of a conspiracy, but then you put the numbers together and you see what member states, especially Western states, are doing, defunding UNRWA and even supporting Israel's actions against UNRWA as an overall attempt to get rid of the agency. This is so wrong morally, legally, and politically, that it is to be looked at as one symptom of a greater problem, that is, does Israel deserve to continue to go unpunished for its relentless attacks on the United Nations? Should there be a consideration of its membership as part of this organization, which Israel seems to have zero respect for?
Thank you. We have a few questions online, and since we're running short of time, I'll just move to Jeremy from RFI.
Yes, can you hear me now? Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. J'ai deux questions, je vais les poser en français. Une pour Monsieur Arrojo-Agudo, puisque j'ai l'impression que les chiffres qu'il a donnés sur l'eau disponible pour les gens de Gaza chaque jour sont légèrement différents de ce qu'on avait de l'OMS il y a de cela quelques temps. Je voudrais simplement qu'il puisse les répéter en français, combien de litres d'eau par personne disponible chaque jour, et la comparaison avec les colons était assez édifiante. Et puis lui demander aussi, on parlait il y a de cela quelques mois de cas de déshydratation et de personnes qui mouraient de déshydratation à Gaza. Je voudrais savoir si c'est aujourd'hui quelque chose qui a toujours lieu. Est-ce que ça a lieu tous les jours? Est-ce que ça a lieu toutes les semaines, tous les mois? Enfin, concrètement, est-ce que des gens meurent de soif chaque jour aujourd'hui à Gaza? Est-ce qu'on peut dire ça? Et puis une question pour Madame Albanese, puisque elle a parlé tout à l'heure des médias qui relayaient peut-être trop facilement je la cite, la désinformation israélienne. Je voudrais savoir à quoi elle pense en particulier. Voilà, merci.
Pedro, I think the first part, yeah.
Je répète en français ce que j'ai dit avant en anglais. Bon, les données qui arrivent, c'est qu'à présent, après couper la provision directe d'eau, qui était très limitée, elle était vendue par l'Israël à travers de Mekorot, qui est la compagnie publique qui dépend de l'armée finalement, c'est tout militarisé. Bon, ils ont coupé cette provision très limitée d'eau, mais aussi ils ont coupé absolument la provision d'énergie, ce qui veut dire que les stations de désalinisation ont collapsé. Et disons, c'était les seules sources d'eau potable qui, avant le commencement de la guerre, pendant le blocage de 16 ans déjà, 17 ans, la provision d'eau potable venait de la désalinisation et de cette petite provision d'eau vendue par Israël. Du moment où c'est coupé, avant c'était pour le 40% de la population qui arrivait à avoir de l'eau potable. Maintenant, c'est coupé. Donc, la provision d'eau qui arrive en moyenne à la population au moment à Gaza, c'est 4,7 litres par personne et par jour. Je dis, n'importe quel d'entre nous consommons sans faire rien d'extraordinaire. Ce n'est pas un luxe. Nous consommons au moins 100 litres personne par jour. L'Organisation mondiale de la santé demande, comme dans la situation extrême, ils disent au moins 15 litres par personne et par jour. C'est un tiers de ça. Alors voilà, c'est une situation qui en plus c'est de l'eau dans la plupart des cas qui a des grands risques ou qui est directement contaminée, polluée par des fécales. À cause de la guerre et avant la guerre aussi. Mais avant, ça veut dire que maintenant, on a les données que j'avais, c'est de l'ordre de 1,7 million d'infections, surtout diarrhée, dysenterie, hépatitis A. Mais vous imaginez, sans des soins médicaux, sans avoir les médicaments et les soins médicaux dont on a besoin, surtout les enfants, les bébés, il y a beaucoup d'entre eux qui meurent. Mais ça, ce n'est pas spectaculaire. C'est une mort silencieuse, qui n'est pas visible. C'est pour ça que je dis, c'est une bombe silencieuse, mais continue à être létale.
Thank you. Ms. Albanese?
Oui, en fait, je suis gré à mon collègue Pedro Arrojo pour avoir utilisé ce concept de bombe silencieuse parce que c'est en fait quelque chose que j'ai utilisé dans mon premier rapport anatomie de génocide. Juste si je peux me permettre d'ajouter ce que j'avais dit d'abord concernant l'allocation de l'eau et la consommation d'eau par habitant, je vais faire référence environ parce que ça c'est même avant le 7 octobre, la consommation d'eau était 80% de ressources non totales disponibles pour les colons israéliens. Pour d'autres Israéliens, ça dépend parce qu'il y a des rapports qui font la différence entre les colons et les citoyens d'Israël en Israël. Et le 20% de ressources pour les Palestiniens, qui ça veut dire 300 litres d'eau par personne et par jour pour les Israéliens, et 70 litres d'eau par personne pour les Palestiniens. Mais il y a vraiment autant de littérature sur ce sujet par B'Tselem, par UNICEF, le WHO, Oxfam International, Human Rights Watch, c'est tout documenté. Le problème, c'est que rien dans les décennies précédentes a été suffisant pour bloquer le projet d'annexion, le projet d'acquisition de territoire par l'utilisation de la force, qui carrément c'est une agression par Israël. Et oui, je reviens sur le point que ça, c'est la mise en danger plus effrayante du système international, parce que c'est systématique. Jamais la justice a abouti à rien contre Israël ou contre un Israélien, et ça a créé un climat d'impunité totale. Maintenant, concernant la deuxième partie de la question, la désinformation qui est, disons, soutenue par l'État d'Israël, d'abord, comme je l'ai dit dans mon rapport le mois de mars, je pense qu'il faut call the bluff. Et c'était quelque chose que Israël aurait dû être exposé, pour laquelle Israël aurait dû être exposé avant. Moi, j'ai appelé camouflage humanitaire, ce qu'Israël fait, d'utiliser le langage, l'argot du droit international, comme human shields, or military targets, or evacuation orders, pour lancer cette campagne génocidaire contre Gaza. Mais enfin, Israël a détruit des hôpitaux, des églises, des quartiers entiers, 80% de maisons, et tout est justifié parce que soit il y avait des combattants, sans fournir jamais des preuves croyables, sans laisser jamais rentrer un expert indépendant qui puisse vérifier. Et après, en disant, ouais, mais c'est pas vérifié, ça c'est des sources de Hamas. C'est là que je deviens furieuse contre la presse qui valide les arguments de Israël sans jamais les tester. Mais il y a une ligne rouge qui ne permettra jamais de justifier ce qu'Israël a fait. Et c'est, disons, la utilisation de la famine, de la malnutrition et la sous-alimentation et la déshumanisation qui a fait des Palestiniens, parce qu'il n'y a aucune justification selon le droit international, même le droit international de conflit, qui permet d'affamer une population. Et ça, en soi-même, est preuve d'intention, intent, genocidal intent, d'intention génocidaire. Et après, le deuxième niveau, c'est que Israël, on nous dit, et surtout des Israéliens qui sont engagés contre l'occupation, l'apartheid et la violence déclenchée aujourd'hui contre Gaza, qui nous disent « les Israéliens ne savent pas assez parce qu'Israël ne permet pas l'information ». Moi, je dis que ça, c'est possible dans un monde comme celui-là d'aujourd'hui où tout le monde est connecté et tout est accessible, même aux Israéliens. Je pense que la responsabilité principale d'Israël, c'est d'avoir nié la vérité à ses citoyens, que les Palestiniens sont des êtres humains qui n'ont pas le seul désir, comme seul désir de la vie, cela de tuer les Israéliens, parce que c'est ça la narration qui a dominé pendant des décennies, disons, même la culture de la société Israël. Mais et pendant les derniers mois, c'est clair que de l'information qui était passée venait pas forcément censurée, mais simplement n'était pas passée aux citoyens et aux citoyennes israéliennes concernant les otages, concernant les conditions de vie à Gaza. Israël, encore aujourd'hui, continue à nier qu'il n'y a pas de crise d'aide humanitaire à Gaza, même si on n'arrive même plus à compter les attaques qui ont eu lieu à Gaza contre les humanitarian convoys, food convoys et centres de distribution.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions. Emma from Reuters online.
Thanks for squeezing me in. Ms. Albanese, I wanted to follow up on your remarks about most states remaining inactive at best or assisting Israel's criminal conduct. In this context, could you comment on Britain's decision to suspend some arms sales to Israel? Would you applaud them for taking some sort of step in that direction, or is there really little point if some arms are still going through to Israel? And maybe for Mr. Katrougalos, who spoke about U.S. policy, I'm wondering if you're hopeful for a shift now that Kamala Harris is the favorite to be the next American president. Do you see a chance of a weakening of that aid for Israel? Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Ms. Albanese, will you start off?
Yes. I think that it's much easier to name the states in the West which have done something to get out of the majority, let's say, majority's course of action of tolerating and even enabling Israel's conduct. There has been Spain, Ireland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Slovenia, to an extent Portugal, who have been more critical, and to a different extent they have taken steps to correct this. But insofar, there seemed to me to have been there has been an incredible support for what Israel has been doing. I don't see a change of politics, and I've had the chance to comment earlier on the British government's decision to suspend. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what I know has happened is that Britain suspended 10%, 30 of the 300 licenses it has for arm transfers with Israel. So numerically, it has definitely not done enough. It has done 10% of its job to comply with non-derogable principles of international law, with the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice. And again, what is most shocking is that countries like Britain continue to have a very hostile attitude toward justice and accountability. We shall not forget, yes, it was the previous government, but the previous UK government who triggered the reconsideration of the ICC jurisdiction over Palestine. This will go down in history as one incredible attempt to hamper justice and to obstruct accountability. Of course, you might argue that eventually the UK withdrew this action, so it didn't make any submission to the ICC. But this was not sufficient because it has meanwhile opened the cauldron to many other states to challenge that jurisdiction and therefore to delay justice. So had it been a real retraction, the UK should have made a submission to the ICC, encourage it to spearhead justice. I mean, this is not what it has done. Instead, it continues to crack down on freedom of expression and freedom of association in solidarity with the Palestinians and with the Israelis who stand in support of the Palestinians. But I really trust the British people who seem to continue to stand in solidarity even in the face of this crackdown.
Thank you, and to George.
Thank you for the question. I don't want to directly get involved in elections in any country, and especially the United States, although it is not a secret. It is very known that we had involvement in these elections by pro-Israeli groups, mostly AIPAC, which tried to use huge amounts of money so not to have progressive members of the Congress re-elected. What I expressed, exactly because, as I'm also mentioning in my report, is a hope for overcoming this divide between North and South by respecting the United Nations Charter and the rules of the United Nations, is that the United States should reconsider. I understand, of course, geopolitics. I'm not naive. But I think that their stance regarding Gaza is going to be, let's say, viewed by many in the global South. And this struggle for the minds and the hearts of the peoples in the South is going to be one of the most important bets in the multipolar world in the years to come.
Thank you very much. We have one more question from Yuri online.
Yes, thank you for taking my question and thank you for this press conference. This is maybe a follow-up on what was just said by the Special Rapporteur, George Katrougalos, and this is also a question about that. According to data from the UNOHCHR, about 12,000 civilians were killed in Ukraine in 2.5 years of conflict, including now 9,000 in the territories controlled by Ukraine. At the same time, at least 41,000 civilians were killed by the Israeli army in Gaza in less than a year, in 11 months. However, the Western states, which have imposed unprecedented sanctions against Russia for the violation of international law and UN Charter, do not impose any sanctions against Israel, and even more, they are delivering weapons, they are publicly supporting the operation in Gaza. How to explain this difference, and can we still speak about the existence of international law and order in this case? I mean, even if for your mandate, how can we speak about international order when the rules are so different from one conflict to another? Thank you.
As I said from the beginning, the rules are not different. The application is, and we cannot anymore stand these kind of double standards and hypocrisy. I think I was clear, but it's easy for me to repeat it. Thanks for your question.
Thank Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Jimmy, maybe the last one, because we are...
Sure, thank you. My question is for Madam Albanese again. I wanted to just, there was talk about press reporting, Western press reporting and whatnot. And I wanted to know if you could tell us, just in the course of your recent work, what evidence that you have unearthed in the course of your work that is not getting out in the press right now, that you think that there's something that's not being told, a story that's not being told, because I assume you have press as part of your sourcing, but other sources as well. So could you just tell us what story, what narrative is not being told that is, I mean, I know you've said a lot of things already, but just specific instances that maybe testify to recent human rights violations or abuses that is not getting enough attention. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Albanese.
Yeah, I will have to ask you to be patient, because I have plenty to say in my next report, which walks on the heels of Anatomy of a Genocide. I wish I could have written another report by now, but the most significant, because I prefer not to hamper anything of what I have, what I'm writing. I don't think that I can really say that I have unearthed any evidence, because I don't have feet on the ground, and I need to rely on a variety of actors to put together and analyze the evidence. But what I think my added value is, as a special rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory, is really to offer a bird's-eye picture of the reality on the ground, including in a historical context, in a historical fashion, so as to help people like you, other journalists, and all the more governments with decision-making power, not to miss the forest for the trees. But one thing is I would like to tell you is that it's pretty clear to me that the genocide that we were unable to prevent, and it is to be punished. I mean, the people who have been the architects and the executors of the genocide in Gaza have to be held accountable, but the genocide was not prevented. We have failed to honor one of the major obligations imposed on member states by the Genocide Convention, which is to prevent genocide and then to punish genocide. But now I see the risk of failing once again in the West Bank, because the attack that Israel has unleashed is not just against Palestinians in Gaza, it's against the Palestinians as a whole. So there is a need to read the writing on the wall and to protect the Palestinians from what it might be in some weeks or months from now, another form of genocide unfolding. So this is why I'm so convincingly sounding the alarm not to turn a blind eye on what is happening to the entire Palestinian population under Israeli military rule.
Thank you. Thank you to all the rapporteurs for being here, and thank you to all of you. I'm sorry this ran long, but we'll close the press conference. If anybody needs the statements, we can, whatever statements are already written, we can try to share that. Thanks for joining us. Have a nice day.